She is a businesswoman and a nurse who learned self-reliance early on a South Texas ranch. Debra has dedicated a considerable amount of her adult life to the pursuit of public policy that promotes limited government and the protection of the freedoms and prosperity envisioned by our nation's founders. In 2010, she ran as a candidate for governor in the Texas Republican primary. She manages a healthcare consulting firm and serves as the chairman of We Texans, promoting public policy and legislation that advance and protect private property, personal and economic liberty, and the legitimate role of the states and their citizens within the framework of constitutional government. Debra is an avid reader, gardener, and cook. She and her husband Noe are the parents of 2 children, and they make their home in Wharton. Debra is one of those conservative women that the establishment loves to hate. And there is nobody that gets more vitriol than a conservative woman. It doesn't matter what level of government it is. It doesn't matter if it's the federal level or it's the state level or it's the local level. If you're a conservative woman, they don't like you much. And they really want you to sit down and shut up. Well, I'm happy to introduce tonight a woman that will not sit down and shut up. Her name is Debra Medina.
Being here this evening. I came walking up that aisle and forgot to pass these out, and I may beep at you if I get down there too far. If y'all don't mind sending those around, I'd appreciate it. You know, Joanne, it's funny that you mentioned conservative women. I'm not someone who talks about the female vote or being a woman very often. I grew up as the oldest of 4 children on a farm. Daddy had 2 girls and 2 boys, and he looked at us all the same, and we all worked the same. And I think in politics and mostly in life, we all have a job to do, and we do it. And we ought to do it well and with excellence and the pursuit of excellence. But there was a front page political section headline in the Houston Chronicle recently that said the Texas GOP has no female candidates for statewide office. And if you read the article about 2/3 of the way through, it said, well, there is Debra Medina. And I thought, what am I if I'm not a female candidate? I mean, I couldn't even get that I was a female candidate. So, you know, you just, Rodney Dangerfield, get no respect. I appreciate, I thought you were going to steal all my thunder. You talked so many fiscal numbers, and I like to talk numbers. I've been in administrative management in the healthcare world for most of my professional career. Healthcare is certainly about serving the needs of individuals, but in the private sector, where healthcare ought to be delivered, you have to make a profit. And early on in my career, sitting in a little bitty rural ICU one evening reading a nursing journal, I read a story about a hospital administrator out of Chicago, Illinois, that said, medicine is big business, hospitals run with nursing staff, and nurses don't understand business. We need nurses who understand business so that we can better run our hospitals. And I thought, you know, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it took me 10 years raising 2 children and homeschooling them to go back to school and get a business degree. And it has been an interesting career path for me to be able to hold the hands of lots of folks who are at the end of their life and dealing with the very real struggles that come with that, and also being a businesswoman and being able to look at how we can do that better. Next weekend, if you can drive to Austin, Texas, I would encourage you to do that. There is an event in Austin called the Texas Tribune Festival. It is a festival of ideas. This is their 3rd year. They have 9 different policy tracks. They'll be talking about transportation and energy and the environment and public ed and higher ed and healthcare and a number of other issues. Joanne and I will be on a panel together Saturday afternoon. There is a registration fee for that, so you might want to look at that online, Texas Tribune Festival. But I share that with you to say I was at the first festival, And because I'm a nurse, I have a particular interest in the healthcare issues, in part because I'm a nurse and in part because we think we oppose government-sponsored healthcare. We're all talking about defunding Obamacare, but it is the largest single expenditure in our state's budget. Where are the Republicans jumping up and down against Texas government-sponsored health care? We're sitting in a church tonight. This is the Bible Belt in Texas. Most of you, I suppose, are Bible-believing Christians. God established an order for society, and health care did not fall under the purview of government. And every time somebody hurts in our society, we look to government to fix the problem. And I thought, I'm going to go sit in this healthcare tract. The Tribune Festival is a festival of ideas. If we're going to find better solutions for our society, then we better come together as citizens of this state and talk in a deliberative way about the problems that are facing us. And so there are 1-hour sessions all throughout the day on Saturday, and the first 40 minutes are generally hearing from the panelists, and the last 20 are interaction with the audience, and you can ask questions. And I was commenting to the organizers of the event after that first festival how disappointed I was that in a whole day of healthcare lectures, not one time did I hear the suggestion that we better be looking to the private sector to figure out how to meet the healthcare needs of Texans. All we talked about, red-shirted, suited-up Republicans, was how to use more Medicaid dollars, how to get more dollars from the federal government, how to enroll more people in Texas on Medicaid, and how to do a better job of delivering government-sponsored health care. Terrible. It's never going to happen. If we really cared about making sure that people had good health care, we wouldn't be talking about insurance. We'd be talking about private sector delivery of health care, and we'd be at least asking the question, how do we get the government off the back of the private sector so that it can provide the services that it is best able to provide? Then you get the highest quality, least expensive, most advanced, best health care in the world. But our government, our leaders in this state are doing everything they can to drive us into the pit of socialized mediocrity. Everything. So Debra, you're running for Comptroller. And Joanne began to talk a little bit about where we are. On that flyer that I gave you, I showed you where the reality of our state fiscally is today. The budget for the coming biennium, our 2014 cycle, actually starts September 1st, 2013. We start the 2014-2015 biennium. I always have to think, the state's fiscal year starts September 1st, the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. So on September 1st, we will start this spending of $197 billion for the coming 2 years. It's up. In 2012, 2013, it was 189.9. And as Joanne said, nearly $69 billion of that 197, 35% is federal money. Who in our state has stood up and said, how do we take care of ourselves financially, fiscally? How do we stop this dependency? Because we've all stood up and said we can't afford the federal debt, right? But who's leading us to say, how do we stop? Amongst the things you mentioned, the Comptroller has not leveraged the authority the Comptroller has. One of the authorities the Comptroller has is the Comptroller of the state of Texas may accept federal funds. Do you think that might also mean the Comptroller of the state of Texas may not accept federal funds? How often often do you hear that federal funds come with strings? Every time we turn around. If you walked in to conduct a business transaction and the person with whom you were conducting the transaction put terms in front of you that were totally unacceptable to you, would you just take them, or would you engage in a discussion to see if you might not get to a little bit more advantageous terms? When are we saying to our congressional delegation in Texas, that's tax dollars we've paid in, if this is the way we're funding, as long as this is the way we're funding, Texas deserves those dollars, but not with these conditions attached. And if those are the conditions, we're not taking them. And let there be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Let people scream, because only then are we going to see change. You know, one thing you know in healthcare is usually change does not come without pain. It's not until we all say, God, I could be a little bit healthier. But it's not until we're kind of facing some kind of pain in our life that causes us generally to make real change in what we're doing. Pain causes modification of behavior. And we are killing our kids and our grandkids. The state of Texas often talks about being a pay-as-you-go state. We have a balanced budget. Bullshit. On its face, the budget should have never been certified 2 years ago. The Comptroller estimates the revenue. What does that mean? The Comptroller looks at the Texas economy, looks at the current tax code. You know, we have in excess of 63 state taxes in Texas. You think about the sales tax and the franchise tax, but there's a motor vehicle tax and a motor fuels tax and a motor home tax and a severance tax and an excise tax, and there are 63 of them, or 64. And the Comptroller says, given our current economy and given the current rate of tax that we have in the state, we estimate that the state of Texas will exact $197 billion from its citizens over the course of the next 2 years. So legislature, that's how much you can spend. And I guess really that's 197 minus the 69 coming from the federal government. So the Comptroller estimates the revenue. We don't do zero-based budgeting. We go straight to that number. This is how much we're going to get. Oh, goody, goody. Let's see how fast we can spend it. And oh, by the way, let's spend it first on all of the fun stuff that people like. The economic development stuff, the incentives to the movie industry and the whatever the pet industry of the year is. And then when we get down to the nuts and bolts and we start talking about the things that most of us would agree are core functions of state government, like infrastructure, law enforcement, border security, education, and roads, we put it on a credit card. And we get to technically, and if I'm your Comptroller, I will have to do the same thing, call it a balanced budget, provided we can make the debt payment on the credit card. The state of Texas has the 10th largest amount of state debt in the country per capita. But the state debt isn't the real story in Texas. Would you say that was 125% growth over the last 10 years? Anybody want to take a gander at how fast local government, that's counties, cities, school districts, municipal utility districts, and other special purpose districts, how fast is their debt growing? 30% a year, 300% over the last 10 years. Texas local government has the second highest per capita debt in the country, right behind New York. That's because your city council members and your county commissioners are handing out services left and right that they cannot afford, that you are not paying for, that we are not paying for. But we're voting to run up the credit card debt every time we vote on another bond election and it passes. And so the level of local debt in Texas is well over $200 billion. If you followed my gubernatorial campaign at all, you know that I've been a grassroots activist for nearly 30 years, and even a Republican Party county chairman, where I was responsible for conducting candidate forums and putting candidates in front of the people, and in that process realized that candidates are very good at telling us what we want to hear, and then we really don't get the government we thought we were electing. I think in part because we're not asking the right questions, because none of us has a crystal ball to know what crisis will come tomorrow. So we can ask all of these candidates how they're going to vote on defunding Obamacare, and they know what you want to hear, and they know what the right answer is, and they will do that, and they will say that. But when there is a proposal to provide additional insurance coverage, health insurance coverage for, I don't know, children with autism, they will decide that's a good thing, and we will pass that law in Texas. When there's a proposal to force insurance companies to cover mammograms for women once a year, every year, they will think that's a good idea, and they will pass that proposal. And so the state of Texas now has over 60 mandates on private health insurance companies that causes our insurance costs, our health insurance costs, to be 3 times that of the folks in Alabama, where they have only 15 mandates on there. Because our elected officials don't understand the role of government in a free and prosperous society. We have lots of discussion about limited government, but I don't think very many of us know what that means. And I certainly don't purport to have the perfect answer to it, but I'm at least willing to have a discussion about it and to ask the question, is this really something that government should be doing, or is this a need that should be met in the private sector by an individual who's responsible for their own life, or by family members, or by civic organizations in a community, and not by the government? So debt is growing. Texas ranks second in the nation in per capita local debt, behind New York and just ahead of California. 18% of our gross state product per person is allocated to debt payment. In other words, if we averaged how much we were producing as Texans, it's just over $50,000 a year per individual in Texas. And 18% of that is needed for you to pay off the debt that you owe to the state of Texas. Not to mention your federal debt, not to mention your local debt, just the state. The state's debt burden is just right under $40 billion. And when I looked at this in 2010, because I haven't seen the amortization schedules recently, but in 2010, if we didn't take on another dime of debt, we needed 40 years to get out of debt in Texas. 40 years. I've got a grandbaby, my first grandbaby due in January. That child will be at least 38 years old if we don't take any more debt before she's out of debt. It's criminal. And we rail against it in Washington, D.C., and we don't utter a peep when it's going on in Austin, Texas. And we thank our county and our city officials for their service every time we see them at church or at the Rotary Club. Public service is public service. But if we don't get serious about what we're doing, we are bringing down on ourselves mediocrity and suffering that there is no reason our society should have to endure. Texas has the 14th largest economy in the world. We have human capital and natural resources that exceed those of just about any place on the earth. And yet, we can't seem to pay for the services that we think our government has to provide. How is that even possible? I am a school of Austrian economics. There are two prevailing schools of economic thought, the Keynesian school and the Austrian school, and one of the notable writers in the Austrian school is a man named Murray Rothbard. And Rothbard said that most historians have made the same error. They believe that the history of thought is a history of progress. In other words, we're always getting smarter. So what we're doing today has to be better than anything we've done in the past. And he said that's clearly not true. There are ebbs and flows in the history of thought. There are good ideas and bad ideas. My daughter has up in her bedroom at our house, she no longer lives with me, but she has up in her bedroom, ideas have consequences, and that's right, they absolutely do. Good ideas have good consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. If we are going to enjoy that prosperous future that our leaders keep telling us is down the road, then we're going to have to do some mental heavy lifting and make sure that we understand the ideas that lead to freedom and prosperity versus the ones that lead to dependency and mediocrity. I think that there are few in leadership that do that, but I do think that there is a brighter future ahead for Texas. I think, as Joanne pointed out, we have an unusual opportunity coming at us in 2014. I'm not sure, frankly, whether we're going to realize that opportunity. Most of the candidates that are on the ballot for statewide office are part of the problem. Most of them have been serving in elected office in Austin for far too long. And I wouldn't be critical of that alone if they were standing at every podium saying, we've got a log in our eye, we need to get it out. But they aren't. They would make terrible clinicians because you would be gasping for your last breath and they would be telling you everything is fine. I'm a nurse that's worked in the end of life my whole career. I'm very good and very considerate at giving you very bad news. We're dying. It breaks my heart. But this great republic is dying. I like to garden. If Texas were a tomato plant, it'd be wilted. It'd be dropping leaves. It'd have bugs on it. And if you treated it just right, and nature was good, and God was good, you might save it. But so far, we don't have any will to do that. Most of the people that are running for statewide office have been in office and have been telling you that things are great, that they are fiscally conservative. Texas is on the right road. We have the Texas miracle. I'm with you. I love Texas. I'm a sixth-generation Texan. I got active in politics when I was in my early 30s. And often I was in a room like this. I was in my 30s, and the average age in the room was probably close to 60. And I kept thinking, man, I love what those people do. One of the groups in my little small community that I saw often was the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I thought, I sure like what those ladies do, and maybe I could join them. And I called the woman that headed it up, and she said, well, Deborah, not just anybody can be a Daughter of the American Revolution. You have to be able to trace your lineage back to someone who fought in the Revolutionary War. And I said, oh, well, I can't do that because all of my people are in South Texas, and they came over, Germans and Bohemians, and settled in Texas. And I'm out politicking, and this woman comes up to me, and she says, I'm your cousin. And we began to talk, and she had done a family tree. And I got that on DVD, and I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. I was so excited. So I gave the documentation to this woman in Wharton County, and I said, look, I can qualify to be a daughter of the American Revolution. And she got to looking at it, and she said, well, Deborah, you got one other claim to fame. You're also a daughter of the Texas Revolution. That same line of my ancestors fought also in the Texas War for Independence. Texas and our ideas about freedom and individual liberty are dear to my heart. And yet we have few who have the courage to tell us what we don't want to hear and to force us to make the changes that we need to make. So what are the opportunities in the Comptroller's race? There are 4 individuals who, I've got a little reverb, I don't know if you can knock me down a little bit. There are 4 individuals who have announced that they are considering filing as candidates in the Republican primary. 2 of them are current elected officials, a state representative and a state senator. 1 individual is someone who had served a single term in the Texas House, and then myself. And so I've been looking at the role of the Comptroller and seeing it as a place where I believe the ideology that I've worked on, the ideas that I profess, can really be useful to begin to right the economic and the fiscal ship in Texas. We better first look at our tax policy. You'll know that I've been working on eliminating the property tax in a serious and meaningful way for well over 4 years. Representative George Lavender out of Texarkana carried a 326-page bill this session that got a hearing before the House Ways and Means Committee. We looked initially 4 years ago at a proposal that was drafted by the Texas Public Policy Foundation that was eliminating the property tax and using just a sales tax to fund that. And it gets us revenue neutral, but it does not get us revenue neutral at the local level. And so we would have been Robin Hooding local government like we Robin Hood schools, and we said that won't work. And we kept working and we kept working. And I had a proposal that I knew was much better than the tax policy we currently have. I wasn't completely happy with it. All tax is bad. All tax is bad. Our job, if we're going to have a free and prosperous society, is to find the least bad tax, one that can be shared equitably and justly by the people, because tax should not be punishment. It is a means to fund these services that we believe we need in our community. That was a great drive I had from southwest of Houston all the way up to Tyler, 5 hours on pretty good roads today. It's local government, state and local government ought to pay for that. Local police protection, water coming out of the tap. Those are local services. We decide at the local level what we want and we pay for it. We've got to have just policy. The property tax is a bad broken policy. It cannot be fixed. It cannot be fixed. And it deprives you of property ownership. Property tax is rent. The facade of private property ownership in Texas is just a facade. We don't own property. We rent it from local government and schools. They own it, and we rent it. We get rid of that tax, then we have restored or gone a long way towards restoring true private property ownership. But we need to be realistic, and we need to be able to fund local government. So how do we do that? And Lavender said, Deborah, the tax rate, the form of the tax you proposed is tolerable, but the rate is not. And I said, I don't like the rate either, but unless we're willing to cut 30% from local government, this is what the rate has to be to get us revenue neutral. And he said, well, we've got to do something else. And I want to, in fact, I got a call from his office the second day of this session. Noah said, Deborah, when are you coming to Austin? And I said, I'm not sure. I've been working during the interim, but I'm not sure when I'm coming back. And he said, well, Representative Lavender wanted to talk to you about property tax elimination, but if you're not coming, I said, no, I'll be there. I'll be there. We'll have this conversation. And Lavender said, if you can't get me to this rate, what else is there? We've got to introduce elimination of property tax. Got to have a bill. Got to get it debated. It's going to take us a long time to get there, but we've got to get the ball rolling. And I said, well, all of the economists that I've talked to and those who have been around Texas state government for a long time remind me that in the late 90s, Governor Bush had a statewide campaign, and he talked about using now don't everybody fall out of your chair, value-added tax to roll back property tax. And I see grimacing. And when I looked at it, I did the same thing because I studied it and I said, this is horrible. But a value-added tax is the least distorting to the free market. And if we do a credit model, all of you are familiar with an income-based model value-added tax. There are two kinds of value-added tax. There's a credit model and an income model. And all that we pay attention to is the income model. The economists tell you the credit model is equally valid. And you know what I like about the credit model? It ain't hidden. Shows up on every invoice. A credit model value-added tax is a sales tax. Everybody pays the same rate. It works much like our retail sales tax in Texas today. It is a credit model because businesses who collect the tax do not remit the full tax to the Comptroller. They remit the difference between what they collected and what they paid. Today we exempt, if you read the Texas sales tax code, it's worse than reading the IRS code. There's so many exemptions in it. If you go to a credit model value-added tax, your business will pay tax on everything it purchases except labor. Every purchase that your business makes, you'll pay the same tax that everybody else pays. When you sell your product, you'll collect that same percent of tax from your customer, and then you'll do the math. I bought $10 worth of goods. We have a 7% value-added tax proposal. Buy $10 worth of goods, I pay 70 cents. Those goods I do something to and I make a product worth $20, I get $1.40 from my customer in tax when I sell it. $1.40 less the 70 I paid, I remit 70 cents. It's a sales tax. We believe 7% is revenue neutral, eliminating every other tax in Texas. Every other tax in Texas. No more excise tax, no more severance tax, no more property tax, no more school property tax, no more retail sales tax. You're paying an 8.25% retail sales tax right now. 7%, well, you're paying a 6.25% state. We're talking about a 7% state. a 10 or 12-year process to get us there, to find out if that's the right thing to do. How often have you heard an elected official stand up and talk seriously about eliminating the property tax? Never. We talk about tweaking it, putting an appraisal cap here. It's broken. It will kill you. If you're taking 2 tablespoons of cyanide every day and my prescription is cut it back to 1 3/4, is that good medicine? And yet that's what we do with the property taxes, just make it a little less painful. So all of you 65-year-olds, we'll exempt it for y'all because that sounds good. And we'll just shift the burden over here to the younger people. And then we'll exempt this category and that category. It's a broken, bad system. So we've got major tax reform proposal. We've got to have fair and just tax policy. Our current system may have served the farmers and ranchers of the state of Texas in the 1800s very well. It does not serve the 14th largest economy in the world well today. We better get outside of the box and have bold proposals. I have a proposal on my desk from Beacon Hill Institute associated with Suffolk University out of Pennsylvania. It is the premier institute in the country for looking at the economic impact of tax policy change. As soon as I put together $70,000, they're going to tell us what the economic impact of that 326-page lavender proposal will be. It's bold policy, and it'll take us years to implement it. It needs debate and study, but we better be moving towards true private property ownership if we're ever going to really have a prosperous and free society. As Texas State Comptroller, there's a tremendous opportunity to advocate for free markets and to serve as a resource to the legislature and the people. I live just outside of Houston, but I bet y'all heard a little bit about the Enron scandal and the creative accounting that was done. There is a need for those who provide financial statements to provide statements that are objective, relevant, and the accounting term is faithful. What does that mean to have faithful financial statements? It means that they are complete, they are neutral, and they are free from material error. It doesn't do us any good to be talking about the fact that our sales tax collections are up 15% this year if nobody bothers to mention that the credit card debt is also maxed out. So yeah, we all got a raise, but we're still spending a whole lot more than we make. That's not a complete picture. And when your local government asks you to vote for another bond because you need to put in a new sewer system in your town, or you need to drill a new water well to make sure that you have water when you turn on the tap, or build new roads, or add a few police officers, you better understand how much revenue you have coming in, how much debt you already have, and how many places there are in the current spending where you could cut back. We've got to have that sort of resource available to both the public so that you can have meaningful discourse with your elected officials, and to the legislature. And finally, again, drawing on my nursing background, one of the things that healthcare providers ought to do is not just assess the patient that's in front of them, but maybe look down the road a little ways and see what's likely to be coming. If your lips are blue and your breathing is shallow, and I don't get you on some oxygen and get some of that excess fluid off of your body, you are likely continuing to decline and get to a point of no return. You better hope you have a healthcare provider who's watching those symptoms and intervening when there's still something good that can be done. Crisis averted. Anybody think the U.S. economy is a little unstable? Anybody a little concerned about your investment portfolio? Anybody worried about the value of the U.S. dollar? Is there anything the state of Texas could be doing to protect you, your family, and your business if economic upheaval comes? I have lived my whole life along the Texas Gulf Coast. If you wait for the hurricane-force winds to be slapping against your house, it's too late to get ready. And even then, you'd have more time to do something than you will when the economic collapse comes. You have to remember the fall of the Soviet Union. How quickly did that happen? It seemed to me like I just turned on the television and I guess I wasn't that engaged in what was going on, but all of a sudden it was falling apart. Civil unrest occurs and there's civil war, and nations that were too big to fail do, don't they? And ours is surely no greater than the Roman Empire was. Where does it rank today on the scale of not even anymore? If an empire that large can fail, ours can fail. We ought to be at least asking, shouldn't we? Are there things we can do as a state? I asked that question of my economic team in the gubernatorial campaign in February or early March of 2009. And we came up with a proposal which involved at least the establishment of a Texas state gold bullion depository. That bill was introduced by Representative Giovanni Capriglione in this session. I was privileged to be at a roundtable discussion in Austin during this session about that bill, and there was a gentleman who had been with the Legislative Council, which is the team of lawyers in the Capitol who review all of the bills that are proposed and make sure that the language is just right and they're put in the particular code, they have the right numbering that they should have, and this man had been assigned to review all bills that had anything to do with state sovereignty. And so he was reviewing this bill, and there was this roundtable discussion, and so he came. We had Paul Ballard, who runs the Texas Safekeeping Trust Company, which is a division within the Comptroller's office that invests Texas assets. Paul was there, and others were there, and this gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, "Did you have something to do with this idea?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I did. Been working on it since 2009. He said, "It's a brilliant idea." He wanted to know if I had read The Creature from Jekyll Island, and he began to talk to me about the Federal Reserve System. And I said, "Well, I'm intrigued that you seem to be a student of that history. I have a question for you. Now that this proposal is out of the gate and you believe it's a good one, it's headed down the track, what else should we be doing? Is that all we need to do? Does that protect us? Or are there other things that we could be doing?" And he said, "Oh, Deborah, I think we should look at state banking regulations." Some of you are going, "Yeah. Who's asking the question?" Who's asking the question? I don't know the answers. I don't know all the answers. I have some ideas, but I know enough to know we better be asking questions. We've got lazy politicians, by and large, who enjoy our affection and their titles, but they are not doing us favors. The statewide races this cycle are going to cost roughly $2 million per competitive campaign. People have told me, "Deborah, you can win that race, you don't need that much money." What they may not understand is that Kay Bailey Hutchison and Rick Perry didn't care one iota whether or not I was in the race in 2010. And they didn't have to come after me. I gave one bad interview and it hurt pretty bad. I have an 8-point lead in this race. I guarantee you. I'm not going to skate by so lightly this go round. If I run an underfunded campaign and I'm not going to do it, I will lose. I have to have the financing to run a competitive race. These races are going to cost $2 million. There are lots of folks that are focused on winning Texas House seats, and that's important. There are lots of folks who are very concerned about the Texas Senate. I don't see as much work being done by Liberty conservatives, quite frankly, for the Texas Senate. But this is our shot. You get a shot at the House every 2 years. And because of the size of the House, there's turnover there. The Senate's a little tougher, but this is the first time in 20 years you've had a shot at statewide office, a real shot. Most everybody on the ballot is in their 40s, or I may be one of the oldest, I'm 51, and I may be one of the oldest people on the ballot for statewide office. Those folks are going to be there for 20 years. They're all campaigning with about $1 million or $1.5 million in their coffers right now. 4 years from now, they're going to have 10. You don't like what you got this cycle, it's going to be real hard to replace them in 2018. Don't overlook the importance of this office. I am a fallible human, but I have a desire to serve and a courage to give us the hard news with compassion and concern for where we are. I need your support. I'd appreciate your support. Joanne, I think y'all take questions. I thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to answer some questions from you.
Let me get my glasses here, Deborah. Let's start. What odds do you give on Texas getting possession back of Texas gold?
You know, it was very perplexing to us that bill did not pass. Every member that we talked to believed if the bill had gotten to the floor that the depository bill would have passed, and that would have provided a place for us to move our gold back. The University of Texas Investment Management Company made a considerable portion. What it did was moved a big portion of its assets, municipal bonds and other funds that it had, into hard gold, not just gold certificates, but actual gold bullion. And that gold is held, I was shocked, at the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank in New York, where the state of Texas or the University of Texas Investment Management Company pays sales tax and property tax and management fees. And for all those fees, we could build our gold depository in Texas. We don't know why that bill didn't get out of committee. It was Jim Pitts' committee, and it did not move out of committee. I guess it'll depend on what happens in the 2014 primary.
That's right, and we know Jim Pitts is gone.
He is.
He'll be back as a lobbyist, though. Okay, some of the proposals you discussed are ideas that are under the prerogative of the legislature. How do you propose to get your proposals implemented?
I'm not sure what that question, maybe whoever did that can elaborate, because certainly the budget is proposed by the legislature, but it is the Comptroller who puts out the revenue number and then who must certify that budget as being balanced. I indicated that 2 years ago the budget was not balanced. You cannot defer payments and call it a balanced budget, and that's what happened 2 years ago. So there's a role for the Comptroller to play in the fiscal management of the state, as there is a constitutional role for the legislature to play. So I think that it's important that we look at those responsibilities carefully, and that and that we understand the comptroller has the responsibility, has the constitutional authority and duty to estimate the revenue, certify the budget, collect the taxes, handle all the appeals, invest the assets, serve as the tax collector and the treasurer. It's a big job, and an important one. There's 2,700 full-time employees at the comptroller's office. It's a big agency with lots of expertise, but one that's also hurting. It's lost a lot of its institutional knowledge as people have moved on. There have been a number of controversies, as you know, in the last several years coming out of the comptroller's office. So it's an agency that needs some executive leadership. I've never managed 2,700 employees, but I've managed several hundred. The other guys in this race have managed state rep and state senate offices with 5 or 6 people in them. I've been in corporate, free market, for-profit healthcare for 20 years, and the last 10 in my own small business. I know how to meet a payroll, how to build a business, how to work in a corporate environment in an administrative, managerial, executive way to make sure that we serve the legislature and the people of Texas in that office.
As a state, Texas, as you said, now has billions of dollars in debt, and Texas is also required to balance the budget. How did this happen, and are you willing to certify a budget that is not balanced?
Well, technically, and that's what I said, I'd have to certify that budget also. Technically, it's balanced if we can make our debt payments. We do have a constitutional debt limit in Texas. And if you'll hang with me, it is that the debt payment cannot exceed 5% of the last 3 years' revenue averaged together. So if our revenue is $100 billion a year for the last 3 years, then our debt payment can't exceed $5 billion. But remember back in 2009, our state revenue dropped precipitously. So if you're at 100, and right now our debt repayment is about 4.8% of our 5% allocated. So if you're at 100, and then you're at 80, now your average is 280 divided by 3 is 90, and 5% of 90 is 4.5. So if you were at 4.8, you're going to be over. And so it's important when we talk about faithful financial statements that we have someone in the comptroller's office who's not just saying, well, I printed them. If you didn't read them, that's not my problem. I think we have to have an advocate for the people who brings the information to the public in a meaningful way that can be understood. There's lots of discussion about what information the Secretary of State provides on the ballot. Do we even know what we're voting for? And what information does the comptroller provide for public consumption about the true state of our fiscal condition? It ought not be all doom and gloom. It needs to be honest, objective, and complete representation of the fiscal condition. And then it's going to be up to the people, because the legislature cannot adopt debt. We do. You're going to vote in November, I hope, on constitutional amendments. Many of them are going to provide for additional debt in Texas. If you vote for that, we're going to take it on. The Legislative Budget Board and the Texas Bond Review Board reviews the bills that are proposed by the legislature to make sure that we're not going to go over. The comptroller has a role in making sure that if we pass that bill, it won't put us over our debt limit ceiling. But ultimately, it's the people. Well, the only way the people can cast an informed vote is if they have some understanding of what the current financial statements look like. And I believe we often paint a picture that is incomplete and in some ways, I think, dishonest about where we are, so that people are compelled to vote. One of the proposals that we're working on right now is Proposition 6. I opposed 2 years ago a constitutional amendment that gave, was it $23 billion worth of additional debt authority to the Texas Water Development Board. It was a lot of money, and that passed. So we created this revolving debt instrument for the Texas Water Development Board. In the past, when we would approve debt at the state level, we would pass a $10 billion highway bond. We would issue $10 billion worth of highway construction notes, and when those paid off, it was gone. It was over. We bought the house, we paid for it, it's done. What we've been doing over the last several legislative cycles is putting on the ballot evergreen debt, so that now the Texas Water Review Board has the authority to issue up to, I'm going to pull the number, $20 billion worth of debt. So they issue 5. When that 5 is repaid, they can issue it again, and it'll never go away. We just passed that 2 years ago, and now our legislature, none of it has been dispersed, by the way. None of that debt that we authorized has been spent for these water needs that we are told are so critical. But you're going to be asked in November to take $2 billion out of the rainy day fund to fund water projects in Texas. The Speaker of the House is going to have a big pack to tell you how important it is that you fund water. Well, you gave him a bunch of billions of dollars to the Texas Water Development Board 2 years ago. Why aren't they using that? If we'd repeal that, because that is debt, and take out of our savings account, I might take that deal. And maybe that's what the Comptroller should have said. Might be better policy to pay for water as we go. We've got what some believe to be this reserve in the rainy day fund. Let's take a little bit of that and put it on water projects. I'd say there's a lot of corporate welfare we ought to cut, but I digress. Next question. Sorry.
That's absolutely true. Well, this group already knows it because I hammer that all the time. Okay, these 2 questions are related, Deborah, and you and I've talked about this before. You have to know the Glenbeck ambush, this person calls it an ambush, will come up during this campaign. So how do you handle that, Deborah, in the campaign?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've acknowledged, you're absolutely right. I had considered actually addressing that in the first part of my comments this evening, to say to you that, and to the people of Texas as I travel around, that that is an issue that I want to address. During my gubernatorial campaign, I had an interview nationally televised that I didn't handle well. And it hurt the campaign, it hurt a lot of my supporters who were trusting me and counting on me to do a good job. And so I'm sorry for that. It's important that I make it clear that I did not then, and I do not now, believe that our government orchestrated the 9/11 attack. But our government has a duty to protect us from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and their ineptitude in identifying and deterring that attack has caused us all great grief and loss in life and in liberty. And the government has never fully accounted for that failure. So 12 years later, we're talking about more wars, and we're seeing almost daily disclosures of the extent of the surveillance state, such that none of us are really aware how much we have truly lost. It was a poorly handled interview by a first-time candidate. And I'm real sorry that I handled it bad. And I need your forgiveness for that.
Got it.
my opponents in this race not to make this race about that interview. And I hope as voters you won't let this race be about that interview, because we've got issues that this office needs to deal with. I have a life of consistent service, ideological belief, adherence to principles, stepping into the arena and getting my face bloody, and I'm going to get attacked. And you know what? I may have another interview that comes out of nowhere, that is difficult, that I don't handle well. I will try to be as honest as I know how to be and to clean it up. One of the things that is disturbing to me about what we're seeing today is one of my opponents in this race, who I know well, has garnered a tremendous amount of support because of his position, because of his authoring of and carrying the pro-life bill in this last session. Anybody in this room not pro-life? Probably nobody here. We're all pro-life. We're all pro-life. But our politicians do a little dance for us right before election, and we all go, oh, that's our guy. He's been there 10 years. How many other pro-life bills has he carried?
None.
Now that he wants your vote for statewide office, is that all it's going to take? See, we make one stumble, because I'm going to stumble, and I'm going to fall, and many of you will say, that's it, I'm done. Or we do one thing that looks glorious, and people run. We've got to be better voters.
Right.
We've got to be better voters. I often quote, now I'm going to drop the man's name. But he says, if we fail to secure for ourselves the prosperity and freedom that a free republic ought to have, it's because we have failed to vote for men of principle. It's not the politicians' fault. It's our fault as voters for failing to vote for men of principle. Let's study, let's work. I'm going to try not to make that kind of mistake again. I want to be real clear. I never thought our government orchestrated it. I'm probably as angry as you are that they didn't protect us. And to the degree that they have responsibility for that, they are responsible. You said earlier, Joanne, in your comments that when you step up for public service, it sometimes means you have that, it goes with the territory, you got to take those calls. Well, when you step up to say, I want to be the Comptroller, I want to be responsible for equitably collecting taxes, making sure we have fair and just policy, investing the assets. If under my tenure we lose 38% of the asset value of the state of Texas like we did in 2009 in this state, you ought to scream at me. I'm stepping up for that job and I ought to do it well, but I expect that I'll be held accountable and responsible. I expect I'll make mistakes. I expect I'll be honest about them, contrite, humble, and if I'm not, I need to be kicked out of office.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, I think maybe, Dr. Kane, did you have another follow-up question that you wanted? Come up, let me bring this to you.
That was my question, and the reason I used the word ambush is that right after I heard that interview, I did a Google search, and it came up with 300 and some odd pages which involved you, and I looked through every one of those pages, and I found only one page that even mentioned 9/11, and it made me wonder where Glenn Beck got the idea that you were saying that the government was involved in that. It just didn't make any sense to me.
February 11th is a day I won't forget. That interview was February 11th, 2010. I filed my candidacy, I believe, the Texas Ethics Commission, I think I filed on February the 11th of 2009. It's my mother-in-law's birthday, it's my daughter-in-law's birthday, it's my niece's birthday. And so I've been campaigning a full year. I'd never been asked. We went back through the campaign email, never had a question about it, never talked about it, never wrote about it, this was 2009, that was 2001. I was concerned about what was going on in Texas, and so it was a question, and I said, gosh, people would like to throw a lot of things. I've been accused of a lot of things, but that wasn't one of them. It was such an important interview. We had been believing that campaign, 2 political icons and a Tea Party candidate in 2009, that's national news, and we weren't getting any. And we kept thinking, all of the consultants around me kept saying, once you get national media attention, the lid's coming off, and you may get into the runoff and actually unseat one of these 2 long-term politicians in Texas. And so we wanted that interview. And I didn't have much notice that the interview was coming. I was really grateful for it. Maybe the Lord was trying to teach me to just be me. I had 2 consultants who worked on a number of presidential campaigns, and leading up to the debate, they had me in tears like I was here a few minutes ago, because they were trying to do this debate prep and trying to structure my answers and make sure I'd say certain things, and I just got really stressed, and I said, I can't do this, not how I work. Let me study the issues, let me understand them. And my campaign manager said, I've known her for 15 years. If she speaks from her heart, leave her alone. And they got off of my back, and we won 2 debates. I won both of those debates. I've not watched them, but y'all had told me, and the reports were that I won. And so I got into that interview. I should have listened to my gut, and the thing that I wanted to say when he said I had these emails was bullshit. I mean, that's who I am. I wanted to say, you know, Mr. Beck, I find that really hard to believe, because I've been campaigning for a year and it's never come up once. But oh my gosh, this was Glenn Beck, and this was national radio. And so I didn't do it well, and I can be comfortable with who I am, but man, I don't like letting those people that support me down. My credibility and my integrity is really important, and I knew people had put their reputation on the line in their communities. You're supporting that Debra Medina who can't win. What's wrong with you? And for that, I grieve. That's what I grieve for. I don't care what Glenn Beck says about me. I grieve that I let you down. And I work really hard not to do that. And so when I mess up like that, it's really tough for me. So thank you for taking the time to look through that and for understanding that it was a difficult interview.
Well, if it's any consolation, very few people do well in an ambush.
Very true.
You know, what is consoling to me is today I run into very, very, very few people who criticize me for my answer. Almost invariably, they are critical of Mr. Beck. And those who are critical of me, I can look them in the eye and say, I'm very sorry. What was it I said that you disagreed with? And I've yet to have somebody tell me what I said that they disagreed with. They heard the host, and they heard his interpretation. I think there may be some opportunity there. I hope so. I think that now that he's a Texas resident, perhaps the perception will be a little different. But our job is I love Micah, love justice, Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly.
Well, hang on to that line, that bullshit line.
Well, Deborah, you know, the truth of the matter is that what happened on 9/11 can happen today, because our elected officials at the federal level and at the state level have overlooked the issue of the wide open border.
That's right.
And we have enemies among us now. And for the people, we have a problem with elected officials in the state of Texas not understanding the interior enforcement of the rule of law. They like to point down to the border and say, well, that's a federal issue. We don't have anything to do with it. But they will not do a thing to cut off the magnets that draw people here.
That's right.
And we're not talking about just your friendly neighborhood, somebody that's going to cook or clean for you or whatever. We're talking about people who are coming across the border from Afghanistan and Pakistan, from China. The Texas Border Volunteers, you know, this is the line that I say across the state. Nobody has the authority to call the border secure except for the ranchers and farmers who live on the border. They are the ones who can declare it secure. And it's not secure. And they're coming over more than ever now because of the amnesty, the DREAM Act. And, you know, we didn't even have one bill this session that would cut off any of the benefits. We couldn't even get the Medicaid, the food stamp reform, the welfare reform that would close the loopholes. We couldn't even get those out of, so, you know, Deborah, here's the deal. We still have people in positions of authority that put their political backsides ahead of the safety and security of American citizens.
Well, one of the things that I had called to my attention, I went down to the border. I talked to I think there's 15 border counties in Texas. I tried to talk to all of those sheriffs to understand from them what was really happening in each of those counties. The counties along the Texas border are very different. Hudspeth County, where Arvin West is the sheriff, the western part of the county, I think he said, is very flat. It's agriculture land, and so it's pretty easy to see illegal immigrants coming across the field and to capture them, arrest them, have them returned. He's pretty confident that we've got a pretty good system in place that when people are arrested the first time, the charge is lesser, and then the more arrests they do, the higher up the offense goes, and it's easier to get them deported. And so he arrests people and documents that. The eastern part of his county is more hilly and rocky, and the terrain it's difficult to find people there. I talked to another sheriff that said he doesn't really have a problem. Most of his county is a 40-foot drop sheer cliff. He said people can't come through here. But the difference between those two sheriffs was Arvin West said his private landowners will prosecute. They will allow him to arrest, and then they will be the plaintiff for damages that are done to their private property. The other guy who has the cliff, he said, when I started as a deputy and we would arrest people, the landowners would allow us to prosecute. But today, most of the landowners in my border county are non-residential landowners. They live in Dallas or Houston or Fort Worth. And when I call them to say, I've arrested 6 illegal immigrants in your bunkhouse, they say, well, how much damage did they do? Oh, well, that's all right. Don't worry about it. Let them go. They're just looking for, and so landowners don't prosecute. There is a disregard for private property. I visited with a farmer who used to grow tomatoes, thousands of acres of tomatoes. He said a few days before he was ready to harvest, they would be harvested for him and his whole crop would be gone. He now grows carrots. You don't like growing carrots? Carrots in the valley get nematodes on them, those bumps, and they're ugly. But they cut them off and they freeze them and you eat them because the tomatoes are stolen right out of his property. There's a disregard for private property, and I think we have real opportunity to, if we could cut off the social stimulus to come, but also if we could restore respect for private property. this is my yard, this is my pasture, this is my field, there is a gate. You go through that gate, you come through the legal means, but you don't just traipse through private property, and we've had a disregard for that. We've got to do a better job as conservatives talking about the ideas of freedom so that people understand what they are. We understand the importance of the rule of law and adhering to the rule of law. Listen to Judge Andrew Napolitano on that topic. He's excellent on that topic.
Well, thank you, Deborah.